We at Ultra believe that there should be a better way to be entertained. This goes for everything from how you explore and play games to how you use digital assets like items in those games. It encompasses how communities are built and managed, and includes how we play games together in things like tournaments or on streaming platforms. Gaming is a big part of our lives today, and we believe that a better, more holistic approach needs to be built from the ground up to enable that future. Because of how wide this vision is, we've started expanding who we talk to on Ultra Chill so that our audience can get a wider lens of what is potentially possible and where new innovations are likely to impact how people play. These aren't all going to be partners or directly working with Ultra, but we think that their ideas and expertise are all relevant and interesting. Our first guest of this type is Bronwyn Williams. We cover deeply interesting things like economics and gaming, dev analytical tools and their effects, and how play and earn differs from play to earn. So, let's get to it. Thanks for joining us today. How do you style yourself? Because I've seen you as an economist and a futurist, and I'd like to kind of get a feel for how you see yourself.
Yeah, I generally describe myself as a futurist economist and trained analyst, and somewhere in the center of that Venn diagram is where I fit. So I like to look at basically the trends that are directing the economy around us. So I'm really interested in money because I think it's such a human thing, and all the things it touches, from finance through to politics through to technology. And that's basically what I do. So try and stay a couple of steps ahead of where the market is currently, to try and get a view as to what could happen, and more importantly, what perhaps should or should not be happening as we head into the future.
Interesting. And you work at a company called Metanomic, correct?
That's right. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for Metanomic, and we're building software for the metaverse, particularly for game developers.
Interesting. And what exactly is your place within the Metanomic project?
Yeah, so it's a bit of an interesting story if you're familiar with the history of Metanomic. Myself and Theo, our founder and CEO, we wrote a book a couple of years back called The Future Starts Now, where we got futurists from all across the world to essentially write letters as to what they were most concerned about happening over the next sort of 50, 100 years, as futurists do. So that's how we met and knew each other. And during COVID, of course, we all started looking for things to do, because during lockdown, right, you have a lot of free time on your hand, a lot of time to think. Theo had the idea of starting a gaming company, and in particular, he brought me on board because I have a background in both futures and in economics, so I understand a bit about incentives and dynamics and how markets work. And he brought me on board with his project to help design a play and earn economy that could be stable. It was a very ambitious game that we started conceptualizing. It was going to be in the style of like EVE Online, very ambitious, but with real world economics built in, which meant we had to get the economics right. And that's why Theo got me involved with the project. I don't have a background in gaming at all, but I do understand people, and I do understand markets, and I do understand money and what's going on in the crypto Web3 space too. And what we came up with was a really interesting kind of dual economy system. We also realized that there was a whole lot of things that we couldn't do with the technology and software that was currently on the market. So we had to start kind of building it ourselves. So we hired very, very smart people, both in the engineering space and in the economic space, far more qualified than I myself am, to help us really conceptualize ways to build more sustainable game economies, not just for our own game, but actually tools that anyone could use. I mean, even at the sort of ambitions we had was to say, hey, why can't central bankers start to play with these simulation and design build tools too?
I think all developers need analytics tools to make good decisions, right? We guess a lot, and we kind of let the market dictate whether those guesses were good or not so good. And I think that it doesn't seem very scientific, right? And when you put it like that, the truth be told, I think it's more like a creative discussion between the developer and the community of people who actually end up using the tool or the game or the app that you're trying to build, right? So I'm curious what your view is on that from the perspective of a company who's really focused on building those types of tools that answer those types of questions.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like when we sort of look about truth today, it's such a vacuous term, right? So what is accurate? People lie all the time. And so where we start to get to the truth is where we start to see actually actions unfolding. So we can get a lot of richer insights through people's behavior rather than through their stated preferences, or through more sort of superficial categories like their demographics, which don't necessarily correspond to what those people want or how they behave in the real world or in the unreal world, in this sort of case that we're looking at here. So that's kind of like the second part of our business. So I spoke a little bit about about the sort of economy design that we started looking at, but we also started understanding that an economy is based up of many, many instances, which is really basically anything that has an economic value, whether that's an action or a virtual good or a virtual service. And all of those instances, as they interact in a gaming platform, of course, create data, which can be used to gather insights. And more excitingly, like behavioral insights based on actual action and actual activity, people actually doing things and behaving in certain ways within your game. So the other product we've developed is a product called Thunderstruck, which is a behavioral-based AI analytics tool that basically is able to categorize players according to their behaviors, according to what they want, according to their true motivations, not necessarily their stated goals, which can always be a slightly different thing.
Well, how common is it for developers to track features and functionality as they deploy it to the market of players?
Well, it depends what you're asking there and like what it is they're tracking. So there's certain things that developers obviously are tracking, there's other things that they're not. And there's also a lot of metadata hidden in the game, or whether the game is the real economy or the gaming is a particular platform or metaverse that you're building yourself. There's a lot of metadata that can be inferred if we start to use smart technologies that perhaps people haven't been tracking because they perhaps didn't even know that it was there, right? So you're trying to make inferences based on instances, etc. And that's when things can get quite exciting, because then you're almost getting into the sort of predictive space, which is where things get interesting. So we can start to match offers to particular people and meet them at their point of need, right? So sort of like, anticipate what people want before they actually know they want it. Give them more of it with the aim of increasing intention and retaining attention in games, which is where all value comes from, which I think is quite an important point with all of these sorts of conversations. When we're talking about gaming, when we're talking about the metaverse or Web3, all value comes from harnessing and attracting human attention, right? Because that's the only real thing in this unreal space. It's the only source of real scarcity, which means the only source of real value. So if you're able to sort of hack that, if you're able to figure out ways to get more of that attention and to get more of that attention on a deeper basis, which is what marketers tend to call things like engagement, then you can make really, really powerful decisions and that can enhance the value of your proposition, whatever that may be.
Can you talk a little bit more about what types of metadata can be inferred?
Well, metadata is just really like saying, if this, then what? Or people that like this sort of thing also tend to like that sort of thing, right? So like a very sort of simple chain would be a case of what sort of type of player would be interested in, say, adding NFTs to a game. And you can make sort of inferences there and say that players that go to this particular quadrant in your game or do that particular activity tend to be the people who are most interested in purchasing like sort of real goods in your sort of virtual store. And then out of that group, sort of which ones of them would be interested in purchasing it themselves, or which one of them would be interested in renting it, say, from like a guild or a group, and on you can sort of go. So I think those become really, really powerful tools for anyone that's interested in selling anything, which most of us are if we're in the commercial space, right? So you can sort of see those inference chains, so you can really target down onto the right person for whatever it is that you're trying to sell or trying to offer.
Right. So you're talking about exposing the right kinds of features to the right kinds of users.
Yeah, and hopefully in an anticipatory way rather than a reactive way, right? So you can say people like you. It's almost like what you get on sort of like a streaming service, or like if you read books, right? People like you read this book, or people like you watch that show, and sort of to be able to sort of funnel people through those sort of journeys as you go along. So this is not like it's not new processes, but it's the technologies behind it that are able to do those things more efficiently and more effectively by harnessing exactly what's going on in the world of AI, which is why we've hired some very, very smart people who specialize in this sort of thing, on AI, behavioral inferences, and analytics, to help us develop these tools, because there's very powerful academic research and technical research. It hasn't necessarily been applied to this problem, and it's definitely not been applied to this problem space if we're talking about the metaverse and the gaming industry. And that's what we're trying to do. So trying to take expertise that has real world proven ability to solve these problems, and then to create specialist tools that help game developers or metaverse platform builders build their games or platforms more efficiently, more effectively, and taking sort of the guesswork out of a lot of the designs, particularly the economic design, the sort of customer touch point journeys that actually get you to a conversion point, that sort of game design. That's where we're really able to help people.
I think that much of the discussion here so far has been from the game developers' perspective, from the business's perspective, right? And I think that it's really important to underscore how important it is that a lot of this functionality is for the player's benefit also, right? Because you have players that they go in to play games and they're not there, for the economic aspect for the most part. They're not there for the market aspect. They're there because they want to experience a certain thing. They're looking to have fun, right? They're looking to play a game. And I know that a lot of the pushback against NFTs and play to earn and play and earn and these kinds of crypto concepts which are being appended to games is because they don't want that stuff. They don't want economics. They don't want markets. They want to play their games, right? So I think what's really important to underscore is that the functionality that you guys are adding for developers is not just for, squeezing more money out of players. It's actually to provide players with a more refined experience. It's a better experience for players so that the games that they play are more fun. Can you talk a little bit about what that actually means from the developer's perspective, providing more unique, more enjoyable experiences through improved analytics?
Yeah, basically the goal of any sort of game developer and of any player really, or maybe we can sort of separate those points. So the game developer's goal is to increase retention and engagement, to get people to play longer and play harder, right? So to play more intensively and more extensively, right? And the way you do that is by building games that are rewarding in one way or another. And this brings us to sort of the economic concept of utility, right? Which can mean different things to different people. Some people get more utility out of this sort of the social aspect of a game. Some people get only sort of very extrinsic utility out of a game from literally participating in play and earn markets, right? But you have to build a game if it's going to have extended retention and engagement for all your players and for all those different types of people that you're trying to attract and retain, then you have to understand what they want, and you have to make sure that those needs or those utility curves are in balance, right? You don't have too many people there to extract financial value from the game, and you don't have enough people that are actually bringing attention and actually playing in the space. Otherwise, you end up with eventually sort of massive capital losses, right? Because you have to kind of see these gaming environments almost like countries, right? So if you're not getting enough out of your social contracts, or you're not getting enough reward, whether that is intrinsic or extrinsic, whether that's the joy of progressing through a progression channel, whether that is social interaction, whether that is financial gain, you're going to take your attention elsewhere, and the game developer is going to lose out. So of course, it's a very symbiotic relationship, right? So the developer wants to attract and retain attention, and the player wants to have fun and or make money. And fun can be different things to different people, which is why our analytics tool tries to sort of categorize what it is that people want out of the game, right? So whether you have killers or socializers or people that are just there for financial gain, you kind of have to understand all those categories and to keep their needs in balance, just so you have a real market, but almost a marketplace of attention rather than a marketplace of money like you'd have in a balanced economy in the real world. So sort of balanced economy in the real world is I have oranges and you have apples, and I want to swap so that I can have a bit of both because I'll get more utility or more enjoyment out of having a fruit salad than out of just having one particular type of fruit, right? You kind of have to just have the same balanced market in terms of the different types of players that you have in your game to have a healthy, balanced economy of ideas and of attention, which keeps everybody more engaged for longer, all those different player groups. But in order to try and design games that do satisfy all of those different needs, we have to first understand who it is playing in our game, and who do we have too many of, or who perhaps do we have too few of in terms of the types of categories of players that we need to create a healthy, balanced environment that's fun and engaging for more people to participate in. But really, at the end of the day, if you're going to build a healthy gaming system or any sort of a healthy platform in the attention economy, you have to build things that are giving people something. People feel like they are getting more than what they put in. So it's kind of like the sort of the most pure form of capitalism, right? Which is the only way we can all have a free lunch, is that we're able to trade and have sort of win-win trades rather than win-lose or zero-sum games, right? Because as soon as your game becomes a zero-sum game, you're going to end up having massive sort of attention loss. People are going to go elsewhere when they're not getting their needs met, and whatever their needs may be. Everyone's needs, as I said, is slightly different. So you have to understand what they want and then make sure those needs are kept in balance.
That was an excellent answer. I really appreciated that. At the beginning of the interview, you said something which I think out of dozens and dozens of podcasts that I've done so far, nobody has said, which is the words play and earn and not play to earn. So That's a distinction that we make at Ultra. We go out of our way to say play and earn, and not play to earn, because we believe that what's fun is going and playing a game, and then you get the addition of the economics or the market additions, and not that you're playing to earn, which is a job, which is not fun. And I think I'd like to talk next about how economies are developed within Web3 games or games in general, because that's something that you've been involved in, and not many people are actually involved in that. And having kind of like a portal into how that works, super interesting.
Yeah, we could probably start by saying that most of the play to earn economies was kind of the beginning of any sort of real money getting into the gaming space, which is very much a Web3 thing, very much a blockchain thing. And there's obviously been a lot of resentment in the more sort of classic gaming community there, because essentially you kind of got this sort of capitalists arriving in what used to be sort of like a common good space and extracting a lot of that value without necessarily replenishing the value, particularly the more sort of intrinsic value as to why people are in those spaces. I think it's always healthy to sort of put the cards out on the table and say that these things aren't necessarily for anyone. But that's just an example of a very unbalanced economy that you have. And you don't have all those players in sort of a nice dynamic equilibrium where people are bringing something to the table. That's we're talking about the sort of zero-sum games rather than the nice win-win games, which is what a healthy economy has always got to be about. I think it's also important to note that a lot of the so-called economics around a lot of those play to earn, very extricative, value-based, let's call them what they are, very much sort of like pyramid type scheme economies, were not necessarily designed to be sustainable. They weren't designed for retention. They were designed for engagement, but particularly engagement of extracting real world financial value from some and sort of passing it down the chain. And a lot of those games were also designed with tokenomics, not necessarily with economics. And tokenomics is obviously a very different field. So you're talking about essentially sort of printing your own money and using all these sort of these Web3 type spaces, which is not quite the same thing with what we've been working on, which is very much more trying to build sustainable economics that help developers to have more retention over the long run, as well as engagements in the short run, which is very, very important, particularly if you are building like EVE Online kind of games, where you invest hundreds of millions of dollars into building marvelous, like amazing spaces. And you just can't really afford for someone to come in there and sort of extract the value from that game and turn it from being a long-term proposition into a short-term kind of like value extraction machine. And that's why people are quite interested in the tools that we're building in terms of actual economic design for gaming platforms and for sort of metaverse platforms too. And we kind of approach the problem the way we approach sort of classic economics in the real world, understanding that platforms or cloud-based communities are in effect almost like a nation state when it comes to the economic side of the game. You have things that are within your control, just like a central banker would have in a nation state type community. And you have other things that are outside of your control, right? So the things to understand is to try to understand what is in your control and to make, prudent, rational decisions that keep as much of that value in terms of both capital and attention. When we start moving into the play and earn space, we have to try and retain both of those levels. And that's what we want to do, much like a government or a central banker would do for a real nation state. In order to do that, you kind of have to understand the laws of the world. And the fact is that if someone can get higher return on their time or on their investment somewhere else, you're going to lose them to that other place, particularly since sort of like immigration in the metaverse is very, very easy, unlike in the real world where it's physically very, very expensive to move yourself and your family from one space to another. When we're talking about like gaming platforms, it's very, very easy to pick up and leave and go somewhere else, at least with your attention. It is a lot harder to pick up and leave when we start talking about putting real money, sort of earn side of play and earn economics into these gaming platforms, which is also why it's important that we kind of have a fair accounting value for the time people have invested in virtual goods and services. They're able to kind of negotiate an exit package to take their real financial value, perhaps from one gaming environment or metaverse platform to another. And the interoperability question is a question we've debated quite a lot internally at Metadata. It's not a problem we've solved yet, but we do understand that the first steps to solving those interoperability problems do come from actually accurate pricing. And pricing, of course, understanding that only scarce element really in the space is people's attention. So how do you actually get a price on people's time and attention that they're putting in, essentially their labor into these places, that you're then able to reward them fairly, whether they want to stay within your environment or leave. But still understanding, of course, that the goal for any developer, just like the goal for any government, is to attract and retain your top tier talent for as long as possible.
I'm actually curious about your thoughts about whether the way that the crypto gaming market unfolded, over the last few years, and whether it was kind of like a generational thing, like it was the first gen, nobody knew what they were doing, and that's kind of how things unfolded, or whether there was something more intrinsic in the way that the crypto market works.
Well, let's start with the first part of the question, how it got to where it was and why we became so cynical about play to earn economics or tokenomics quite early in the days, because, well, humans are humans, right? We're talking about human nature here, which is, I think, something that we cannot deny, which is, again, why we've approached the problem the way an economist would in the real world, which is not to deny human nature, but to try and create incentives that work with it. But it also comes down to what your actual objectives are. I think there are a lot of very clever minds in the Web3 and blockchain space that understood that by exploiting human nature, you could extract a lot of value from the dumb money towards yourself being the smarter money, right? And a lot of the sort of the tokens that were so big at that time, whether we're talking about the gaming economy or the sort of great crypto market that was going on, were designed to extract money from the stupid and to give it to the smart, right? Much like the laws of nature. That's a very cynical way to approach this. I know there were some good projects, but it's very hard to find case studies. Believe me, I've worked as sort of a trained analyst for a long time. To find uncynical case studies from that period is very, very difficult. It's not to say there weren't good people involved, but rather when it comes to human dynamics and money, everybody's kind of looking for a free lunch. And if you found a way to literally create a free lunch for yourself at the expense of someone else, because that's the other thing with markets. If it's not a win-win trade, it's a win-lose trade. It means that someone is losing and someone is winning. And that's what we saw a lot of in the sort of the early days of the space. I mean, even that's very cynical because it's such a new market. It's not even old yet, and there's no experts in this space either. But that's kind of what happened there. It was just simply a case of human nature, people looking for ways to exploit people because it was so easy to do, right? And these things do work until they stop working, much like most multi-level marketing kind of opportunities are. And almost all of them tokenomics based play to earn gaming opportunities or make money from gaming opportunities were designed as multi-level marketing schemes, right? Which is not an illegal Ponzi scheme. I don't want to go down that road at all, but rather it's a game where the early adopters win very, very big and people that join later simply cannot ever make the same sort of returns. In fact, eventually you get to a sort of layer in the whole sort of multi-level level. The people stop being able to make money. They are designed not to last forever. And I think a lot of the people that were involved in these projects came with them from actually quite good perspectives, but they didn't expect them to last as long as or get as big as they did, which meant that we kind of got to that sort of extricative endpoint, the point where there's no more value in the system because it's designed as a one-way economy, not as a dynamic, sustainable economy. And then they started looking at ways to try and make these things more sustainable, to turn them into longer run projects. And that's where we are now at the marketplace, which I think is a really interesting point in time, and also why we think there's quite a big opportunity for what we're doing in Metanomic, in that the more sort of classic gaming market is starting to look at ways to do play and earn gaming, but in a sustainable way. And they take it a lot slower. And they're looking at it less in sort of a short term, sort of launch a token, make a lot of money very quickly, and then get out and do the next project, and rather looking for more sustainable ways to integrate real money compensation for players' time into their games in a way that will last as long as the game has to last to recoup that investment in building a thing in the first place. But also the crypto market and the Web3 space is also maturing. And like most of these things in the sort of Gartner hype cycle, you get a lot of nonsense at the early end of the curve, and a lot of people with weak ideas make a lot of money just because it's new and exciting. But as time goes by, people become more cynical, they ask more questions, and you have to start actually putting value on the table if you want to last in the space in the long run. So both sides of the market, both the new side of the market and the old side of the market, are looking at ways to get involved in the play and earn space, but in different ways. So you kind of got the Web3 side that's looking at ways to actually play, to actually make some of these games fun and not just about the money, because you can't, but if you make them just about the money, they're simply not going to last and be sustainable. But at the same time, The more classic side of the market is having to look at ways to actually compensate people for their time, because that is the thing with Web3, whether we're looking at it from a crypto space or whether we're looking at it from a sort of a metaverse platform space. What that has in common is that Web3, unlike Web 2, the last year of the internet, is all about the recommoditization of the commons. It's about pricing and valuing everything that we do digitally online. So it's about tracking and tracing, but also about pricing and valuing, which means that people are wanting compensation for their time because it now has a market value. So consumers and gamers are understanding this, but so are platforms and businesses and marketers and advertisers. And that's kind of the space that we're in at the moment. So the web as we know it, we're moving into the web of value, not just the web of fun and entertainment.
Bronwyn, this was a really engaging, thoughtful, and interesting conversation, and I really wanted to thank you for your time and your expertise.
Thank you so much for inviting me.